Ah, yes, the infamous Fujimoto cliffhanger for Chainsaw Man. When I saw this, I was like, really? Really, Fujimoto? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm shocked, and I wish I had the next chapter already, but this man, Fujimoto, has been cooking in part 2 of Chainsaw Man. Like, he has made some of the best chapters of the entire series, because, honestly, Denji got probably one of his biggest W's he's ever received throughout the story, and potentially is about to receive his biggest L he's ever had in Chainsaw Man. So let's get into all of this. Let's talk about what happened within this chapter, to Yoru and Asa kind of finally being back together again, to also seeing how there could be a ravine forming between the two characters thanks to the actions that Yoru did within this chapter, to Denji losing his penguin and gaining a penguin, to also getting the setup with, Fami, and how, Yoshida seems to know her to some degree. There's a lot that's going on in this chapter, to also finding out, like, you could buy an aquarium with 1 million yen. So let's dive head first. Let's start off with the ending of this chapter, because I think everybody is going to be talking about this one. What is going to happen? What is the possibilities available for Chainsaw Man going forward, thanks to this conclusion of the chapter? So I think everyone that read this chapter probably had their heart skip a beat. I know I did, because when I saw this finale, like when I saw this final panel of the chapter, this instantly reminded me of like some famous panels. Like one panel in particular reminds me of the whole Bang panel from Makimo, what she did to Power a long time ago. You have where Fujimoto always likes to do something like this, where when you turn a page, it gives you just so much shock. You're like, no way, this is not happening. And because of how Fujimoto is as an author, what he's done with the story of Chainsaw Man to this very point, he can go any direction with this. He really can. And I think anyone could just downright say, if we can all collectively agree, we don't know what is going to happen, because he goes in so many chaotic directions, we don't know what to expect. But there is some things we could guess at, and I want to throw out some guesses. So, as I talked about in my Chainsaw Man video I made last week, and I was just talking about all the current events that's happened within part 2 of the manga, I talked about how Denji technically is more of a support character. He is not necessarily the main character anymore. Yes, the series is named after him. Yes, he's called Chainsaw Man and Denji as well, but at the same time, we do know that technically Chainsaw Man can kind of come back in his own way, or Puchito technically could, because we know devils go back to hell and then they come back, so it's not necessarily the end. Even if, let's say, hypothetically, Denji dies, it's not necessarily the end of Chainsaw Man. So he might not actually have plot armor, since part 2 of Chainsaw Man technically has made Denji more of a support character. Now, regardless of how we feel about that, this obviously is leaving us up to wondering what is going to happen next for Chainsaw Man, because now what's coming into question here is if Denji actually has plot armor or not, and is a main character such as Denji safe? Because one thing that was stated already, and I talked about in my last week's video, is that Yoru, or Asa in this case, is someone that is actually been stated as the main character of part 2 Chainsaw Man. So we know she is the protag, at least right now, of the story, and Denji, as I said, is the supporting character. So him dying here is possible. It's not necessarily something that, is impossible, but it can happen. He definitely could die permanently, and Chainsaw Man in some shape or form will get reincarnated. That is something to factor in. Now, if we're kind of throwing that aside, and the obvious what may happen, let's talk about what happens theoretically if Denji doesn't die. So a direction that can happen here is that Yoru is either going to be able to turn Denji into a spinal cord sword, or it's not going to happen. Now, let's just go on a limb here and say that for some reason, she tries to make a spinal cord sword of Denji, and it doesn't work, okay? She does that, and then Denji's like, what are you trying to do? And brushes away her hand and all that, and, Denji's not probably the smartest tool in the shed, and so he might not really figure out what's going on. Maybe he will, who really knows? The point is that he might just brush it off as like, what are you doing? And just think that, Asa's a really weird person. You might notice, like, the difference with, the facial structure, how she's acting, but overall, most likely he might just brush it off. That's what he could do. Now, another direction is that the spinal cord weapon does work, and Denji, instead of dying necessarily, he gets turned into a weapon, a spinal cord sword or a chainsaw, and he doesn't necessarily die. Someone comes up like, Yoshida, and he pulls the cord on Denji's chest, which revives him, and Asa/Yoru has a weapon of Denji while he's also technically alive again. And basically, she can have a permanent, reusable weapon from Denji. Kind of like a Soul Eater situation. If anyone has ever watched or read Soul Eater, then you know what I'm going along with, how characters can turn into weapons. In this case, maybe Denji will just become a reusable weapon for Yoru/Asa, which would be interesting direction if that is where Fujimoto wants to take the story. Who knows? But I can definitely see that direction, because judging by how Fujimoto likes to keep everything chaotic and crazy and what he does within his story, I could definitely see, Yoru seceding and turning Denji into a weapon, and maybe we might think he's dead, but he's really not, and, he just gets revived, but she also has a weapon of him, and he's just an infinite weapon glitch, or something like that. That would be pretty hilarious if that indeed happens. I think that would really fit the overall theme of Chainsaw Man, and what Chainsaw Man normally does within the story. Once again, I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that is food for thought. So yeah, it's a legitimately interesting conclusion to the chapter, because obviously with the whole Denji wanting to go on another date with Asa, this shows Denji as growing as a character. And I guess this is a good segue to talk about that. Let's talk about Denji's growth as a character and what this necessarily means for him as a person because of him asking Asa on a second date. So if we go back in time, we go back to the beginning of Chainsaw Man, honestly, hell, even before, right before Power's death, okay, before, Power died, to put it bluntly, Denji was kind of someone that was a hound dog. He would only care about touching someone, their chest, to also just wanting something in a more of a 18-plus manner, so to speak. And so when you think about just Denji as an individual, him asking Asa on a date shows growth, because he didn't act something like a slime ball or a sleaze. He just is like, hey, you want to go on a second date and all that to get to know each other better. And I think this is, once again, a very big detail that so many people are going to gloss over while reading this chapter, because once again, I think everybody's attention for the chapter is going to be this. It's going to be Denji potentially dying or not dying, what's going to happen, etc. But I feel like this little dialogue of him asking Asa on a date, a very innocent question, is very powerful for his character, how far he has come since the very beginning. And if theoretically this is the end of Denji, let's go on that limb again, if this is the end, it would be a very sad conclusion, but it would also show how much he has changed as a person, and it would be very shocking if that is indeed one of the last things he ever says in the story. But anyways, backing up from that though, and get back into Denji as a character, I think though Denji showed a lot of interesting characteristics in this chapter. One thing I want to point out is that the chapter begins where Denji's just he doesn't know what's going on or whatever. For instance, I made up my mind I would not have mindless obedience. And I think this is a very powerful moment as well, showcasing his development, because Denji as a person, he was always someone that would just listen to anyone to get what he wanted. He listened to Makima, he would listen to Rize, he would listen to pretty much anyone that commanded him. If, he got something out, like a kiss or whatever, a hug, he would do it. And, we obviously saw him kind of fall back into that trait a little bit at the end of the last chapter, but we could see that he made the conscious thought of I don't want to do that no more. And it really shows, once again, he is growing as a person. He is changed quite a bit, and it's powerful. I think this is a very powerful moment for his character. And also another thing, the reason why he didn't see what was going on with Asa/Yoru and Fami and all that happening within this chapter with the Eternity Devil, you have it to where he's so focused on this penguin, he doesn't pay attention to anything else. And I think this is actually hilarious and very in character for Denji, because even though it sounds so absurd and stupid, it's so in character, because Denji's just focusing on this penguin. He's like, oh, very cute, very cool penguin. He grabs this penguin, he's holding it, he's very happy, and then you have the fight take place and all that, what's going on here. And as everything's slowly starting to settle down, you see Denji walking back with a penguin. He's like, hey, he's so cute, I want to keep him, just holding the penguin. And then eventually, the penguin's taken away from him, so he doesn't pay attention to anything that technically happened in the chapter. He doesn't see what happens in the fight with the Eternity Devil or anything. He just cared about the penguin, and I think that's just very funny. But despite all of that and his disregard for everything else, he still wanted to ask Asa, hey, do you want to go on a second date? So goes back into what I talked about earlier. So yeah, it's legitimately good chapter for Denji's character development, but also explaining why he didn't realize what was going on. Now, let's talk a little bit about this situation. So Yoshida and his connection with Famine, or Fami, whatever name you want to throw to her, and I decided to pull up his wiki here, and just to kind of make sure I remind myself, because when, honestly, Part 2 Chainsaw Man started, I forgot who this guy was. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I will be honest here. I forgot this is a guy that was in Part 1 and appeared briefly. You could even see what arc he took place in, like the International Assassins arc. He was very brief in it, but he still did appear within Part 1 Chainsaw Man, and there's really not a lot known about him. Like, you know, his personality, like it even says here, not much is known about Yoshida's personality. Like, we don't know anything. Just he wants to keep, you know, Denji's secret that he's Chainsaw Man a secret. That's really it. There's not really too much known about him besides him having like a contract with the octopus devil. That's it. So when we see this moment happen within the chapter, he takes a look at Fami, and we know she was, oddly enough, missing from the whole eternity devil thing, being stuck in, you know, the aquarium. He probably knows something's off. Now, we don't know necessarily what this look between the two means. Either they're working together, like they're partners trying to figure out what's going on and trying to get Chainsaw Man for whatever reason do what they want. Some typical shenanigans. Or he knows what Fami did and he's like, I'm on to you, better stop. Or he's just suspicious of Fami and, you know, it's like a, you know, what's going on or what happened in Part 1 with Chainsaw Man where people were suspicious of Makima. Well, either or could be the case, but there was definitely a very big moment here that once again could easily be glossed over because everything else that happened in the chapter. This is definitely setting up for something, a confrontation between these two, or we find out that they're working together, one or the other. Now, another thing too I do want to talk about is Yoru's power. So, we get to see Yoru basically turn, or not Yoru, also turn an aquarium into a weapon for a 1 million yen. And I pulled up Yoru's, you know, overall abilities, showing her powers and all that. And basically, one question I do wonder now, and I was really wondering this, can Yoru turn fiends into a weapon? Now, to clarify, we have seen Yoru turn, you know, body parts of devils that are disconnected from the devil and stuff into weapons. We've seen this. But we don't necessarily know if a fiend like Denji could be turned into one or not. If I am wrong there, correct me if I am wrong. Please do so. But we don't really know if the power can extend that far to Denji. Because if there is one thing to really make very clear, is that we find out that, you know, apparently the War Devil lost a portion of her power to Chainsaw Man. I mean, it literally says it right here, like you could see. And so, War Devil, or Yoru, she's not as strong as she should be. She doesn't have max power because obviously Chainsaw Man took a portion of her power. So, even hypothetically, she is capable of taking over fiends and turning them into weapons. She might not be able to turn Denji into one as well, because obviously Chainsaw Man took a portion of her power away, and Chainsaw Man would be theoretically stronger than her. So that is food for thought as well. So we gotta see where that one's gonna go. So her abilities are very interesting. I don't know how far her overall abilities or ownership go. She needs to assume she owns something. And does Yoru believe she owns Denji? That is the question. We get to see briefly that Yoru admits she has feelings for Denji, but the question is, does she truly understand what these feelings are, what love is, and does she truly have ownership over Denji? See, that's how her ability works. She needs to own something. And Denji makes it very clear at the beginning of the chapter he doesn't want to be obedient or owned. That's one thing, but obviously I don't think that really matters. It just matters if, like, the actual devil in question, like the War Devil, assumes ownership. And theoretically, thanks to Asa and Yoru sharing the same body and mind, I wonder if, for instance, Asa said she has the feelings for Denji, if it might collide with Yoru's abilities, and since Asa might think she owns Denji or romantically owns him, like she wants to be with him, that Yoru can't trample on that and take that away from Asa, which in turn means that maybe her ability will just not be able to be used against Denji. Once again, I'm just throwing things out there. I don't know if this is possible or not. I don't know. It hasn't been actually clarified, but we do have to wonder, because I feel like there is going to come a time to where Asa and Yoru, and them sharing the same mind and body, is going to have some conflicts. And I feel like, hypothetically, thanks to what happened here, at the end of the chapter is going to definitely cause quite a confrontation between the two characters. It's really going to cause these two not to like each other anymore, regardless if Denji gets turned into a weapon or not. So, well, we'll see. We're going to see where it's going to go. But, yeah, overall, this chapter of Chainsaw Man is absolutely fantastic. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen next. And man, Fujimoto been cooking. He has been cooking some quality chapters. I cannot wait. I think we can all agree. But I guess I'll leave it at that. If you guys want more Chainsaw Man videos and content, do leave me a like. It does let me know you guys are interested in it, and I would greatly appreciate it as well. But with that, be safe, stay healthy, Chibi out.